Okay, so I welcome everybody who ever listens to this recording. This shall be a friendly, dynamic discussion about something that we can call conditions or conditioning. Now, what does this mean? Like, very logical, it means that if there is something, it will be the condition of something else. As I can give an example, the existence of a being is conditioned through conception by the parents, for example, or that the many things about which we can speak in these terms is like um, water conditions the survival of human beings. That is another type of just conditioning. These are just, examples of what it means, that things don't happen out of themselves, don't happen just like that. There's always cause. This is basically cause and effect. Only that in cause and effect we think only in terms of two things. So this is here, and out of this we got that. But if we want to look at it with a larger scale and we speak about only human life, then we can speak about a conditioning. So, for example, what is the unavoidable reality of human life? What is one thing that is for sure in human life?
Suffering.
And even more evident is?
Death.
Yes, death. So suffering might not be evident all the time, but death is certainly a matter of fact reality. And, we might think, what conditions death? Because of what is there death? What could we say? Just an example. We can give here examples. Like, what is the reason for death? Like, if that one thing wouldn't be there, then death wouldn't be there either. Because of what is there death?
So-called birth.
Birth. Yes. When, the being takes this lifetime, then it's born. And it's because it's born that it will die. Had it not be born, it wouldn't have suffered death, right or wrong. So without the presence of birth, there wouldn't be any death either. So, this is what we mean by conditioning, and this is cause and effect. However, we can go further on. So like, what is the condition for birth and so on? And we can go to the point where we reach the, so to say, the origin from which we end up in experiencing death, so to say. So, what is the original starting point of, in the sense, suffering? And that is about which we can speak about, which we will speak about. And normally this is called dependent arising, because things arise in dependence to something else, and this is called dependent arising. And this is what I want to do. We can have a little, not so to say brainstorming, but with insight. What comes after what? Because we're very logically thinking. We have to think about it. As we knew that birth conditions death, we have to think about what conditions birth. Like, why is there a birth? Why is there conception, or why is there appearance in the world? That is the next question that we have to ask ourselves. Like, why is there birth? What conditions birth? And this might seem a little odd question, because the only thing that right now we might feel that we experience is the outcomes of birth. And because we might feel that we cannot reach beyond this point, it doesn't mean that, in fact, logically we can prove this factuality, like what conditions birth. And we have to just really think about it in this way as we thought about death. Like, or if you think that there is one thing that for sure conditions birth, then you just say it, and we have to see if there is anything in between those two terms. So let's say you could have said to death that, for example, because of suffering there is death, for example, but we would say that there is birth before suffering starts. So if you think that there's anything that for sure is before, a destination, so to say, birth, then just think about it. What is that thing which you say that might condition birth directly or indirectly? So in one step or in several steps. Just very logically, just try to think about it, like what could it be?
You crave something. You have
We
a
crave
desire.
something.
Yeah, you
Okay.
want to desire something, and you still have a
Okay.
craving. You still have a clinging to it.
All right. Okay. So we for sure know that there is some kind of craving, and we can understand it in the following way. Even if there's somebody who doesn't accept that, life is taken after one life to the other one, then even still, then there is a desire to continue, right? Even if there is no acceptance of this prenatal reality, still there is the craving for it to continue. Okay, so there is craving somewhere in the list, correct? So life somehow comes out of some craving. But we have to see if that craving is enough, or is there something in between craving and birth? Well, as you said, we crave it and we cling to it, right? Because if there was a momentary craving, but then we would realize, oh, there's craving, and we wouldn't cling to it, like, oh, there's craving, and at that moment we stopped it. Then we would cut that in that moment, that desire, correct? We would stop it for that moment, right or wrong?
Correct. Yes, right.
So first we crave something, and then we cling to it, because craving can be something in the present. Clinging can happen also towards a memory, right? Something that is not here in the present moment, but it is like an imprint in the mind, and then we cling to it, like concepts. We might crave something, and then we cling to the concept, for example. So there's craving and clinging. And of course, I think that we accept that clinging comes after craving, because first you see some, let's say, beautiful form, okay? And then you like it, and then there's a craving of wanting to have it, for example, and then you cling to the idea or to the memory of after having fulfilled the desire, for example, you are clinging to it. So the question is there anything between clinging and birth, so to say? The wish to continue, can we say it like that? I wish to continue this. So I want a new becoming, correct? I want another becoming which will continue to serve me with these forms, for example. So can we say it like this? Because there is craving, there is clinging, and because of this clinging, there is the desire for becoming. Oh, I want to continue this. I want to become again, to experience this again. And even in those who don't accept post-mortem and prenatal life continuum, so to say, that there was life before and maybe after, then still there is this desire for becoming. And this is not then a question of belief and faith. It is a pure question of tendencies of the mind. Because the moment there's a desire for becoming, then that will so you set forth the generation, destination, and then there is birth. So, as you said, craving, clinging. Out of clinging, we want to become. Let's continue. Let's become. Let's see it again. And out of that, there is birth. And out of birth, there is inevitably the death. Do we agree on this, or do you think that there is anything in between?
No, I'd say we agree.
Okay, I mean, we have to look at it with insight. What comes from what? And if you see that there's a direct correlation, because you see between craving and becoming, there was there is a correlation, or like birth and craving, but we see that first we crave, then we cling to it, and then we want to continue, and then there's a continuation, because there are these sub steps, so to say. Because we could say, in fact, if we want to just speak about cause and effect, that because of desire there is continuation, and we could form a group of steps like craving, clinging, and becoming. We could call these in big desire, correct? So in a way we could form these groups, but if you really want to cut it into the small pieces that actually happen, we crave it, it's desire, we cling to it, it's desire, and we want to continue with becoming, that is also desire. So yes, in this sense, of course, we can form these groups, and then we can say that out of desire there is birth, and that would be, of course, correct. And if we understand this even in this sense, that because of there is desire there is birth, that is also already great improvement, and I might even say sufficient improvement, because then there is the understanding that desire creates suffering. And when it's understood in its deeper and deeper level, it means that one tends towards wanting to get release out of this. Okay, so we said that there is craving, there is clinging, then there is becoming, then there is birth, and then there is death. The question is, what is the condition for craving? What do we crave? This is the question. From what is there craving? Just think about it, everyday life. When there's craving, what is that which we truly crave? What is the common denominator of all craving? What is the object of craving?
Peace, happiness. I want to be peaceful, want to be happy. And oftentimes it comes from a memory.
Okay, you said peace, happiness. What are these? Peaceful, happy, joyful. What are these called?
Feelings, emotions.
Yes, exactly. Feeling, we crave feelings. Look at it. Whatever experience we have, whatever experience, what do we crave out of all? Look, because when there's an experience, let's say I see an object, that is also an experience. In fact, I perceive that object, I see its qualities, I get to know the object, correct? Through experience, through being conscious of it, right or wrong?
That's correct.
So, but out of all of that, just look at it. When people want something or not want something, it is the feeling towards which we concentrate. Oh, what feeling it gave us. Oh, it made me happy. Oh, it made me miserable. All these things, we crave the feeling. So out of feeling, because there's a feeling, there is craving. And then clinging, wanting to continue, namely becoming, like births, and then death. Okay, so there's feeling. Very logically, it's feeling that we crave. Out of all those experiences, there's always the feeling. Just look at sexuality, for example. It's not the beauty and the, let's say, the three-dimensional form, like mathematical perfection of a body. We crave the feeling that we get out of it. This is the effect chart, and it's true for all the senses. It's even true if you have a jhana experience. In a jhana, let's say it's very peaceful, so to say, or there's equanimity. And then when one emerges out of it, or even during that, there can be this craving for it. Oh, I wish to experience it again. There was a feeling, and then we just hunt it. Right now, I will, we bite the feeling and we enjoy like surfing on a wave. Oh, how beautiful it is. So we always crave the feeling. And the question comes, where does feeling come from? Where is the origin of feeling? If you say that it's out of the blue, then I will say that feelings are independently existent and they themselves are freedom. if they're unconditional, then they are freedom itself. But can we say that?
No, we cannot.
So where is feeling? When is their feeling? When is their feeling, let's say, of your child or of your friend? Let's say that you think of a friend, okay? And you have a pleasant feeling, okay? Like mentally pleasant feeling. If you hadn't thought of that friend or you hadn't seen them, would you have a feeling towards them?
No, it's because you thought about it. So
Okay.
then that feeling arose.
If I saw them, is it the same thing also?
Yes.
And what is the same in feeling and thinking and, I mean, not feeling, seeing and thinking and touching?
Contact.
Contact, exactly. Because you contact an object, you have a feeling. And this is an universal formula. This is all the time like this. Even in the case of an arahant, when they see something, there is neutral or pleasant feeling that arises all the time. It is all the beings, no matter what plane of existence, no matter who, when, why. If there is a contact with an object, there is feeling. And out of contact, there is feeling. Out of feeling, there is craving. Out of craving, there is clinging. Out of clinging, there is becoming. Out of becoming, there is birth. And out of birth, there is death. So far, so good. It was out of logical definitions that we say so. And now we have to think, where does contact come from? What is the basis of contact? Without whom would there be no contact? So we have to think about it. What do I contact visible objects with? What do I contact memories with? What do I contact audible things with?
The aggregates.
But can I, with memory, touch something, or is it something with which I touch memory, for example?
The senses.
The senses, yes, exactly. Because there are senses, through those senses, like with my own eyes, with the body, I can touch. With the ear, I can smell. With the tongue, I can taste. All these things because of the senses. Through the senses, I think that Mo wanted to say, especially the form, like the form aggregate and its faculties of eye faculty, the tongue and the such. So these we have contact. It's very logical, right? That through the senses, I contact those sense objects. Right or wrong?
Right.
So out of the senses, I create contact. It's very logical. I touched something. Have I contacted it? Yes. I saw something. Have I contacted it? Yes. So out of contact, we had the feeling, and we know what is below feeling: craving, clinging, becoming, birth, and then death. And the next question is, and this is the point where first we couldn't go on and we had to read about it, but we might think about it logically. Where do the six senses come from? So the six senses are the five senses plus the mind sense, so to say, when we touch something mentally, so to say. But where do the six senses come from?
The mind.
Okay, mind is one thing, and so it's actually a good point. Normally they call it mind and matter. So you have to think about it the following way. Because there is a mind door and there is matter, just think about it in this following way, that in the time of conception, when the being is started to be formed in the womb, there is a mind door that starts to form, and there is materiality that starts also to form. So this is what we call mind and matter, that, because of past, let's say, craving and clinging, okay, there is a consequence when this new becoming happens, this new birth happens. There is mind and matter. So there is the mind door, and there are the other five senses. So because there is mind and matter forming, there are the six senses. So this is what it means, that the six senses come from mind and matter. That the new, when conception happens, and then matter, the aggregate, the form aggregate starts to form, and in the form there are the sense faculties as well, and that is how it starts to form. And the mind, it simply means, the life continuum, we might say it as such. And then the question is, where are these mind and matter coming from? What is dependent on what are mind and matter coming from?
Well, the form, contact.
Okay, they create what? So when we said like this, that in a way you have also answered, and I know that what you are thinking about, but try to find a better word, because contact comes out of the six senses. So, but where
Craving.
Okay, but with craving, what do we do? What do we create with craving?
What do we create with craving?
Yes, in a sense. So when I have an unwholesome state, like craving, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a type of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is an active creation, right? Or I'm craving it, like there's an active effort, right?
Right.
And all these active efforts, what do they create in the future? If I have unwholesome, yes, that's also true, but existence also comes because there is a resultant, right? Because they create their own results, correct?
Resulting, yes.
Yes. So in fact, these mind and matter, so the factuality that mind and matter starts to form, and it is not that it wouldn't start to form, so it starts to form, and then it creates the six senses, is because there are resultant consciousnesses who create their own results. So imagine that at some point you saved the life of a being, okay? It's a very wholesome doing, especially if there is no pride in it, especially then, of course. And then this is an active effort, right, which creates its result. And out of this resultant, in a certain celestial realm, let's say, the new life will create the mind and matter. So the resultant will start to create the mind and matter constituents of the existence. So the materiality and the mentality, so to say, of the new existence. And because it's always the resultants that creates the new life. Because even when we spoke about feeling and then craving is an active effort. It's an active, unwholesome, so to say, we can say unwholesome state, which then leads one to become again. Here we simply say that it's because of resultant consciousnesses of the past that mind and matter starts to form in this in a new becoming, right?
So resultant creates the next slide.
Yes. So the resultant type of consciousness creates the new materiality and mentality of that life. So for example, if a being kills so many other beings, okay, it means it has a lot of unwholesomeness. And if it will be the type of consciousness whose results will create the new life, then we say that that resultant created the mind and matter. And of course, you can see that if a being, let's say, killed so many other beings, right, then there will be deficiencies in the materiality or mentality. Say that they will be born with no leg or no hands or blind or deaf, just examples. It doesn't mean that all deaf people are born deaf because of killing people. I'm just giving an example that having done those things, there are resultants, and this is called resultant because it is the result of that active effort of doing wholesome or unwholesome things, whether it be just simply material wholesome or unwholesome, or like meditative jhana wholesome. And the results, for example, if one has stayed in an experience of infinite space for a lot of time in their lives, then the resultant of that active effort of infinite space experience will create the resultant infinite space, which means a birth in infinite space realm of existence. And obviously, because it's immaterial, there will be no materiality, there will be only mentality. But that is the only way, because other times it's materiality and mentality. But in planes of existence is where the being hasn't craved materiality and went for purely mental experience, like immaterial jhanas, they go for immaterial existence then. And then there is only mentality, not materiality. And of course, there are only the six senses. Out of the six senses, there would be only the mind sense, so to say, right? That's very logical
right.
thinking.
Yes.
And then the question is, where are resultants coming from? I mean, we have already said it, but we have to just name it. So where do resultants happen by themselves? Like, oh, here I am a resultant. Here I will, reap the fruits.
No, they don't happen by themselves.
What do they happen by?
By something else.
And what is that something else? When do I have results? What do I have to do to have a resultant?
Action.
I myself have to do something, right? Action.
Yeah, action.
Like active, they are normally called, so to say, active volition, active like choice, so to say. What is an active choice? Wholesome, like mundane, wholesome, mundane, unwholesome experience. So if I give money for the poor out of loving kindness, or I start to kill people out of hate, these are active volitions because I actively create resultants, because all these will create their own fruits. So all the mundane, wholesome, and unwholesome are these active creations. And normally these are called karmic formations because those actively form the resultants of the future. So actively, because I can only actively form resultants. So if I do something out of non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion, it means it's wholesome. If I do something out of greed, hatred, or delusion, it's unwholesome. Or if I enter jhana experiences, that's also wholesome. And here it's very important to say that here are only the what's the right word for this? Mundane types of consciousness. So supramundane is not included in this because we shall see why it's not included in this one. Because even the supramundane consciousness, namely the path consciousness and the fruition, those are also wholesome and resultant, but they are not included in the karmic formations, but we will see why. So, just taking this simply that, okay, because there is active creation with wholesome or unwholesome states, those will create their results, correct? And when they create their results, those results will create mind, materiality, and mentality in the future. Then material and mentality will create the six senses. The six senses will create contact, because if there is an eye, it will create contact with a visible object. In the visible object, in the object, when it's contacted, there is feeling. If there is no wisdom, out of feeling there is craving, out of craving there's clinging, out of clinging there is becoming, out of becoming there is birth, and out of birth there is death. And the last question is, if it's clear so far, dependent on what are there actively wholesome and unwholesome doings. Because both wholesome and unwholesome create their respective wholesome and unwholesome resultants, like results in the future. And the question is dependent on what. Why is it that we, with our actions, create results, and our actions are not just merely performing their functions? Like, imagine that you do something wholesome, but something non-greedy, so to say, and that, it creates its own resultant, wholesome resultant. But why is it that I cannot do a wholesome thing, non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion thing, without having a result? I just merely performing the function of non-greed or non-hatred, and non-hatred, but I still have the result. Because of what do I still have results? This is the last question that we possibly can have. What is it that creates results out of the actions? Because of what reason would we give rise to unwholesomeness? Think about it like this. Because of what would we enter unwholesome states?
Is it a choice? You make that choice?
Well, we make that choice, but if we truly knew that they are unwholesome, would we give rise to them?
Well, some people might. They might pursue bad habits that they know are bad.
Okay, but then there is no understanding how harmful it is, correct?
Yeah, correct.
So if there is a lack of understanding, if there is a lack of wisdom about the nature of things, how would you call that?
Ignorance?
Ignorance, correct. Because there is not knowing, there is a lack of understanding, there's a lack of knowing, so to say, because there's still, so to say, even when we do a wholesome thing, okay? Let's say that we give food for the hungry, okay? But because there is this latent tendency to reflect that, oh, I gave food to the other. Yes, it's wholesome, but at the same time, it may give rise to, there can be a beautiful feeling in it, but then we can crave it, we can cling to it, you see, because we reflect further on it, because it doesn't arise within our minds to just simply do it and then it rises and it falls, so it would be simply performing its own function. As long as there are feathers, namely as long as there's greed, hatred, and delusion, our actions are wholesome and unwholesome. So namely, as long as there is ignorance in any way in the mind, no matter how beautiful that thing is done, it still creates its own result. So of course it's good that it creates wholesome results, but it's its own nature that it creates wholesome results if it's wholesome. But the reason for which it creates results without it is not that it doesn't create, so to say, is because there is still greed, hatred, or delusion in the mind. And therefore, all these doings of ours, if there is no greed and no hatred, there might be simply delusion about it. So this is how they create their, as long as there are feathers, the actions create their results. Because there is some kind of attachment to the things done. This is how you have to look at it. And out of ignorance, there are wholesome and unwholesome things. Out of wholesome and unwholesome things, there are the resultants, their respective resultants, their respective fruits, so to say. Because there is their respective fruits, those respective fruits will create materiality and mentality of the future life, of the future, so to say. Material and mentality creates the six senses. The six senses create contact with those objects of the senses. When contact is there, there is a feeling, and this is for sure. So if there's contact, there is feeling. You cannot do anything about this. And here is the difference. Here is the only point where we can change. So dependent arising, it has only one link where you can intervene. And that is when there is feeling, there is craving. Now that is the point where you can come and you say, there is a feeling and period. And you don't crave it, you don't cling it. You see, cling to it. And that is the only spot independent arising where we can come and we can stop the dependence. So this is the crucial point, to see that when there is contact with an object, there is feeling, and out of this feeling the mass of suffering starts to happen. But if at feeling we can stop and we can see that it is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, and you don't crave it, at that point you stopped for a moment dependent arising. So you don't degenerate. You don't create destiny in that moment. In past moments you might have created it, but you started to tend towards putting an end to arising. And because out of feeling, let's just finish this, out of feeling there is craving, if there is no wisdom. Out of craving, there is clinging. Out of clinging, there is the desire to continue, so becoming. Out of becoming, there is birth. And out of birth, there is death. And this is our 12 links, so ignorance, active volitions, resultants, mind and matter, six senses, contact, feeling, craving, clinging, becoming, birth, and death. So this 12 linked formula gives the reason of why are we here. So any life can be seen as coming from an active volition of creating. And we created this, and this is very important because many times people say that, oh, I was created by a deity. But just look at it and see that it is our own misery, our own not knowing that brought us where we are. So the moment there is birth comes inevitably out of some kind of wish to continue. For example, even for bodhisattvas who go for future Buddhahood, even them, they have in a way a desire to help quench suffering, and it will be that desire, so to say, that keeps them going in this sense. So when there is birth, there is some kind of wish behind it. So this is the so-called dependent arising, and this is how out of ignorance, out of not understanding, we end up in generating destination. And in fact, dependent arising can be put in groups, like the groups of the past, the groups of the present, and the groups of the future. And like future is the new birth with then the coming death. The past is the past ignorance to the point of creating the six senses, and contact, feeling, craving, clinging. These are that of the present moment. So I mean that of what is going on now. So, but and there we can tear it into pieces and speak about it. But basically, there are three very important ways one can contemplate and may contemplate and even should contemplate dependent arising. So first we looked at it from the bottom to the top. So from death, we arrive to the origin of all the mess of suffering, which is not knowing, which is ignorance. That is one way to go about it, to go from the ends of the list to the beginning of the list. So this is how we logically can understand dependent arising, that here we are born and we are inevitably going to die. And then we have to see out of what is there this birth. And thus we can reveal the origin of all this whole mess of craziness, so to say. Another way is, having seen the whole list, one goes the other way around. There was ignorance, not knowing, then there were active formations, then there were resultants, and so on, and one realizes now there is birth and there is inevitably death. And the last way to look at it is, in fact, from the middle. What does it mean from the middle? You look at contact and feeling, the present moment, namely. There is contact of objects, and then there is feeling. And then you go from this direction upwards, and from this direction downwards. So you see the past reasons of contact, and you see the future results of feeling. And in this way, you see the danger created in the past and the danger awaiting in the future if cravings are not put to an end for good, so to say. And then, of course, the end of suffering would be to know that if there is no birth, there is no death. If there is no desire for becoming, there is no birth. If there is no clinging, then there is no desire to become. If there is no craving, there is no clinging. If there is no feeling, there is no craving. If there is no contact, there is no feeling. If there is no mind and matter, there is no, if there is no six senses, there is no contact. If there is no mind and matter, there are no six senses. If there is no resultant, there is no mind and matter. If there are no active creations, there are no resultants. And if there is no ignorance, there is no active creation. So if you go from up to down, you will see how this all suffering came to be. And if you go from down to up, knowing that if the previous one doesn't exist, this doesn't exist, that is how you put an end to suffering. And the question now arises, I said that, active volition is always the mundane consciousness. So not that which directly aims at the unconditional reality, because let's say when an enlightened being wants to be absorbed into the void here and now, they just turn away from the mundane and they enter the supramundane. And it is done, of course, by a supramundane consciousness, because in order to experience, so to say, an unconditional reality, one has to have it with an unconditional tool, namely an unconditional type of consciousness. And in this sense, that is why supramundane, which means those types of consciousness that release the being from suffering, those are not included in the dependent origination. Why? Because at the very first place they come when all ignorance is put aside, or at least to say a certain amount of ignorance is put aside. Then, for example, one becomes a stream enterer when one gives up identity view, doubtful thinking, and attachment to rituals. One has put aside a large amount of ignorance. Therefore, a path which purifies the being arises, and the fruits of experiencing freedom happens. And thus is that the supramundane is not included in the dependent origination. Why? Because its root is not ignorance. Its root is not, so to say, not knowing, because it's so to say, its root is wisdom, it's understanding, and therefore, because it's sublime, that is why it's not included in dependent origination. And that is why that will be the one thing that leads out of dependent origination. The unconditional consciousness, namely when one can enter with awareness into the desireless or the signless or the void. That is what we call released awareness. That is when conscious, and you may ask, well, isn't it so that then consciousness takes its object, the void, and there's feeling? Well, we might say it as such, but in its reality, we always say, this is just, so to say, metaphorically, we can say that the void is taken as the object, because the void itself is when there is no object. So we can say such things as taking the void as the object, but ultimately it is when the mind turns away from all objects, and then there is, of course, there is no contact. And this is the point, that if there is no object, if the consciousness enters, so to say, dwells in nothing, so when it dwells nowhere, there is no contact. And this is the point. If there's no contact, there is no feeling. If there is no feeling, there is no destination, because there is no craving, no clinging, no desire. And that is why we can also say that the freedom is the desireless element, because it puts an end to contact, because the mind finally turns away. So awareness, so to say, consciousness turns away from all these objects of visible forms or fine material or immaterial, and it goes towards something which is outside of the of rise and fall, so to say. And when it arrives there, it is non-dwelling, because it finds no object. It is not incident, because you can understand contact as the incidence of the sense on the object. But if the awareness itself doesn't find an object on which it could be incident, because it turned away from all objects, then we say that consciousness is unconditioned, because it is not incident on one single thing. Therefore, it doesn't manifest anything, because through awareness we manifest all things. Because if I'm aware of objects, visible objects, then I manifest the visible world. I manifest what is visible. If I'm attentive at memories, if I have attention, awareness towards memories, then I bring them to life. But if my awareness simply doesn't dwell on anything, object or concept, then we say that it entered the void element, or the desireless element. Because what does it mean to be signless? To be signless means to have no object. So if we say that there's a signless concentration, so to say, it means that the consciousness has turned away from all the signs of existence, all rise and falls, and it entered that which doesn't rise and doesn't fall. So that which is the non-arising, that which has no dependent existence because it's independent. And then we say that the awareness is released, one is free, but not till then. And in fact, it is the dependent arising which one got rid of when one enters the supramundane. One understands and strikes to the understand and to be absorbed, or to even for a moment see the unconditional, because then there is no ignorance, no karmic formation, none of these. And of course, you might say, but that is also momentary, because at some point, even if one is absorbed into the voids or signless or desireless, one will eventually come out of it. And I will say that you are right. But that is because there is still a body here, there are still memories. So in the, so to say, back in the background, in the mind, there is still a form. And that is why even the unconditional states, as long as one is in one's own life, so to say, there is a time limit. They say that one can stay in the supramundane absorption for at most 7 days. And after that, one will eventually emerge. Naturally, the mind will tend towards back to materiality. And thus, so to say, it's not yet fully liberated. It's liberated, but it still has some residual body, so to say, because the body is still there, the form. And feelings also arise when they emerge from it, of course. But after they, eventually die, namely the being dies, after having abandoned all ignorance, then, consciousness enters the desireless or the signless or the void, and it emerges never again, because there will be no more turning back, because there will be no residual formations. There is not a body still there. There is no more feelings still there. And now you might ask, why do we call the ultimate reality blissful if there is no feeling? And then I will ask back, why do we call it blissful when there is no feeling?
Because
Without-
feeling. Go ahead, Ma.
Oh, sorry, Ma. Without feeling, there's no rise and fall.
Yes, it's a very good explanation, because feeling always came from contact, and it is dependent. It's not independent. And it's blissful in the sense that all things cool off. All things, so to say, become ultimately peaceful. And that is the reason for which we call it blissful, because there's no more arising. Consciousness is, so to say, what is the best way to describe this? Is absorbed in the signless, in the void. And when, consciousness doesn't find anything, any incidence, because all the craving is left aside, it means there is no more destination. It means that that consciousness simply becomes, it doesn't manifest anything in the future, so it's non-manifestative. It is completely devoid of qualities, quantities, and that is why it's peaceful, because it is not incident on something. It's not caught up. Awareness is not caught up in anything whatsoever. And then it is free. This is why we call it liberation, because this awareness kept finding objects and it kept enjoying those objects, and now it can finally give up dwelling on objects and become non-dwelling, and then it is free. So that is the end of all conditions, of all conditionality. if there's anything that anyone would like to add or ask or say, because you can contemplate, because this is just really the basic formula, and one can contemplate and give examples. Oh yes, I remember I contacted a friend through, or a being on the streets with my eyes, and I really liked it, and then I had craving, I had clinging. You can give very logical examples, and then you can also see that all those desires had their results, which were the beginning of all this mess of unpleasantness, of suffering. And if there is nothing to be added, then I thank you very much for listening and hear you another time.